Hello, and welcome. If you enjoy calm stories like this, tap like and subscribe for a new one each week. Let's begin. Close your eyes. Breathe in the scent of dry, warm air. Imagine a sky the color of faded saffron, stretching over a world that has known 10,000 sunsets just like this one. The light is soft, slanting low across gentle dunes that ripple toward the horizon like a sleeping sea. This is Arrakis, but not the desert world of old legends. This is a softer place, a greener place, held in the long, patient watch of its emperor. We are going to walk a quiet path through his story, a story that spans millennia. There is no hurry here. There is only the whisper of the wind, the slow turning of ages, and the deep, steady peace of a purpose held for longer than any star you have ever seen. Let your thoughts drift. Let the story carry you. Chapter 1. The Long Reign. In the heart of this quiet empire lived its emperor, Leto II. He was not a man, as we understand the word, not anymore. 3,500 years ago, he had made a choice to save humankind from itself. He had accepted the life of the sand trout, the small creatures that were the first stage of the great sandworm, and had allowed them to cover his body, to become his living skin. Over the centuries, this fusion had transformed him. He had grown immense, a colossal being, part man, part worm. His face, still human, looked out from the front of a great, segmented body that coiled in the cool, stone halls of his citadel. His arms, though still his own, seemed small against the vastness of his form. He was a strange and awesome sight, but his presence was not one of fear. It was one of immense, unmoving, calm. He was the God Emperor, a title he accepted but did not relish. It was simply a fact of his long existence. He had lived so long that history had become his personal memory. He remembered the taste of water in a forgotten oasis. He remembered the face of his father, Paul Muad'Dib. He remembered a time when the entire planet was a sea of sand, shimmering under two moons. His transformation was for a singular, all-consuming purpose. He called it the Golden Path. It was not a road of gold, but a future he had seen with his prescient vision, a vision that allowed him to see the countless threads of probability stretching into the future. He had seen a future where humanity, brilliant and hungry, would invent a machine or a leader so perfect that it would trap them forever. A future where they would stagnate and fade into nothingness, a quiet end to a bright species. He had seen this trap 1,000,000 times in 1,000,000 possible futures. The Golden Path was the one, narrow corridor through time that avoided this fate. It was a future where humanity would learn a terrible, necessary lesson from his long, oppressive peace, a lesson of survival. To walk this path, he had to become a tyrant, a gentle, patient, absolute tyrant. He held all the power. He controlled the spice, the substance that gave longevity and expanded consciousness, the very heart of the old empire. He controlled the water, the armies, the histories. His reign was peaceful, but it was a cage he had built with his own body, his own life, to protect the creatures inside until they were strong enough to break free. Every day, for thousands of years, he endured the crushing weight of his own form, the deep, aching loneliness of being the only creature of his kind. He was a shepherd watching his flock in a valley that spanned millennia, and his only companions were his memories, his purpose, and the endless, patient sand. And the desert, though changed, remembered him and held its breath under his long, silent watch. Chapter 2. A World Remade. The Arrakis that Leto ruled was not the Arrakis of his youth. The great desert, the endless ocean of sand called the Dune Sea, was gone. It had been shrinking for centuries, pushed back by a slow, patient greening. Leto had changed the world itself. He had brought water. Great canals, called qanats, crisscrossed the land. These were not simple ditches. They were marvels of engineering, underground watercourses that carried life from the polar ice caps to the new, fertile plains. You could stand on a low hill and see the dark, straight lines of the qanats stretching for miles, marked by the lush vegetation that grew above them. The air, once so dry it would steal the moisture from your breath, was now softer. It carried the scent of damp earth, of green leaves, of blossoms from the new forests. Clouds, once a rare and wondrous sight, now drifted lazily across the sky, casting slow-moving shadows on the ground below. Rain would fall, a soft, whispering sound that the old Fremen had only dreamed of. The people no longer needed stillsuits to survive the open air. They walked in simple robes, their faces open to the mild breeze. The cities were no longer hidden setches, carved into rock to escape the sun. They were open, sprawling things, built along the banks of the new rivers and the great qanats. They were cities of shaded colonnades, of open-air markets filled with the fruits of the transformed land. You could hear the gentle murmur of water everywhere, a constant, soothing presence. Fountains played in quiet courtyards, their spray catching the light like scattered jewels. The buildings were made of stone and a new kind of wood from the managed forests, their colors muted and earthy, blending with the landscape. But not all of Arrakis was green. Leto, in his deep wisdom, had preserved a piece of the old world. A single, vast desert remained, a place called the Sareer, Sareer. It was his desert, a reminder of the past and a necessary part of the planet's new soul. Here, the sand was still golden and fine, the dunes still sang in the wind, and the old ways were remembered. The Sareer was a sanctuary for the ghost of the past, a place of stark and silent beauty. Leto would often travel there, his great body moving like a slow river of flesh across the sand, feeling the heat and the dryness that were his first memory. He understood that a world, like a person, needed its memories. It needed to remember the hardship to appreciate the peace. The ecology of Arrakis was a reflection of Leto's own soul, a careful balance of control and freedom, of green softness and the enduring strength of the arid sand. It was a living lesson, written in water and earth, for all his people to see. And the water flowed, and the leaves rustled, and the world breathed a long, slow sigh of change. Chapter 3. Fish Speakers and Order. To maintain his long peace, Leto II had an army, but it was unlike any army that had come before. They were called the Fish Speakers, and they were all women. This was a deliberate choice. Leto had seen in his visions that male armies inevitably turned to conquest and ritualized violence for their own sake. The Fish Speakers were different. Their loyalty was not to a flag or a commander, but to their God Emperor, and to the deep, maternal instinct of protecting the life of the Empire. They were priestesses as much as they were soldiers. Their presence was quiet, but absolute. You would see them in the cities, walking in pairs, their gray robes simple and functional. They carried no obvious weapons, but their discipline was a shield around them. Their movements were calm, efficient, and graceful. They spoke in low voices, their eyes missing nothing. They were the human face of Leto's will, the gentle hands that enforced his golden path. Their training was not about aggression. It was about awareness, about understanding the flow of society, about seeing a problem before it began. They were mediators, judges, and guardians. Their rituals were simple and profound. At dawn, you might hear their chants drifting from their garrisons, a low, melodic hum that seemed to resonate with the earth itself. It was a sound of unity, of shared purpose. They would gather in great, circular chambers, the air thick with the scent of sandalwood incense, and they would listen to the words of Leto, carried by his major domo. They were his voice, his eyes, his ears. Their name, Fish Speakers, was an ancient one, rooted in a myth of fertility and life emerging from the water. It was a name that spoke of their core purpose, not to destroy, but to nurture the great human sea. They were the protectors of the long peace. They ensured that the cage Leto had built remained secure, its bars unbreakable. They did not rule through fear, but through a kind of unshakable certainty. They were a constant, calming presence, a reminder that the God Emperor's watch was unending. When a dispute arose in a market, a fish speaker would arrive. She would not shout or draw a weapon. She would simply stand there, her calm gaze falling upon the people involved, and the anger would seem to drain away, replaced by a sense of reason. Her authority was not in her strength, but in the immense, ancient power she represented. She was a single drop of water, but behind her was the entire ocean of Leto's will. And the chants faded with the morning mist, leaving behind a quiet sense of order across the land. Chapter 4. The Duncan Returns. For centuries, Leto had a constant and constantly changing companion. His name was always the same, Duncan Idaho, Duncan Idaho. But it was never the same man. The original Duncan Idaho had died thousands of years ago, serving Leto's grandfather. But the Tleilaxu, masters of genetic manipulation, had a secret. They could regrow a person from a few cells, creating a perfect copy called a gola. A gola was a body without memories, an empty vessel. Over and over, for 3,000 years, Leto had commissioned a new Duncan gola from the Tleilaxu. Each one was raised at his court, trained as the captain of his guard. Each one was a perfect echo of the loyal, impulsive, and fiercely honorable man who had served the House Atreides. And each time, Leto would watch the Duncan grow, would see the familiar patterns of thought and action emerge. He would see the same questioning eyes, the same stubborn set of the jaw, and each time, Leto would find a way to break the gola's conditioning, to awaken the memories of the original Duncan Idaho. It was a painful, shocking process for the Duncan, a sudden flood of a lifetime he had never lived. He would suddenly remember the sting of a sword, the face of a lost love, the loyalty he had sworn to a duke long dead. And with those memories came a terrible conflict. He was Duncan Idaho, yet he was serving the son of the man he had served. And this son was a monstrous creature, a worm god who ruled the universe with an iron hand. Many of the Duncans could not handle this paradox. They would rebel. Their ancient loyalty to the Atreides name would clash with their horror at what Leto had become. They would try to strike at him, to end his tyranny. And each time, they would fail. Leto was too powerful, too ancient. And each time, the Duncan would die, a brief, fiery spark of rebellion against an eternal, unmoving mountain. But Leto kept bringing them back. Why? It was a question that even his closest advisors could not answer. Perhaps it was a form of self-punishment, a constant reminder of the humanity he had lost. Perhaps it was a tool. Each Duncan brought with him the morals and instincts of their ancient time, a fresh perspective that Leto, in his long solitude, desperately needed. The Duncans were his connection to his own past, to the man he had once been. A new Duncan has just arrived at court. He is young, strong, his eyes full of the clear, uncomplicated certainty of a soldier. He does not know his own history. He looks at the God Emperor with a mixture of awe and suspicion. He serves with perfect loyalty, for now. But Leto watches him, and waits. He waits for the memories to stir, for the inevitable rebellion. He waits for the fire, for the pain, for the brief, precious companionship of the ghost who had walked beside his family for generations. And in the quiet halls, the footsteps of the new Duncan echoed with the ghosts of all the ones who had come before. Chapter 5. Whispers from Ix and Tleilax. Leto's empire was a universe of enforced simplicity. He had outlawed complex thinking machines, computers that could replace the human mind. This was a core lesson from the ancient Butlerian Jihad, a war fought to free humanity from the tyranny of its own creations. But two great powers always nibbled at the edges of his laws, testing his resolve with quiet, subtle temptations. One was the Bene Tleilax, the secretive genetic masters. They were the ones who provided the Duncan Golas. They were a deeply religious and patient society, who believed their control over flesh was a sacred art. They offered Leto other things, too. New kinds of flesh, new biological tools. But Leto knew their ultimate goal was to replace his power with their own, to create a universe shaped by their strange and hidden faith. He dealt with them carefully, taking what he needed, like the Duncans, but giving them little in return. Their whispers were of the power of the body, of shaping life itself to their will. The other power was from the planet, Ix. The Ixians, Eons, were master technologists. They were not warriors. Their power was in their cleverness, in their ability to build machines that were subtle and seductive. They did not build thinking machines, not openly. Instead, they created devices that mimicked them, that pushed right up against the boundaries of Leto's laws. One of their most dangerous creations was the No Chamber. It was a room, or a small device, that could hide its occupants from prescient vision. Anyone inside a No Chamber was invisible to Leto's sight. He could not see their future, could not predict their actions. This was a direct challenge to his power. The No Chamber was a pocket of pure chaos in his perfectly ordered universe. It was a place where plots could be hatched, where rebellions could be born in secret. The Ixians would send their ambassadors to his court, and they would bring gifts. A new kind of navigation device for a starship. A new tool for recording information. Each gift was a quiet question, a test. How much technology would he allow? Where was the line? Leto understood the danger. Technology was a seductive promise. It offered ease, comfort, and power. But he had seen where that road led. It led to dependency, to a softening of the human spirit. It led to the very trap he had sacrificed himself to avoid. So he kept the Ixians and the Tleilaxu at a distance. He used them, but he never trusted them. He knew they were like slow, patient tides, constantly eroding the shores of his empire. Their whispers were a constant hum beneath the surface of his long peace, a reminder that even a god must be vigilant. They were a necessary part of his golden path, the friction that would one day force humanity to grow stronger. And the stars wheeled overhead, cold and distant, indifferent to the quiet struggles of gods and men. Chapter 6. The Atreides Seed. For thousands of years, Leto had guided the bloodline of his own family, the Atreides. He had arranged marriages, guided destinies, all in the service of the Golden Path. He was breeding for a specific trait, a human who could do what he could not, A human who could live and thrive without being seen by prescience. A human who could be truly free. And now, he believed he had found her. Her name was Siona. C-O-A. Na. She was a direct descendant of his own twin sister, Ganima. She had the Atreides look, the dark hair, the piercing eyes. But there was something wild in her, something untamable. She hated him. She saw him as a monster, a tyrant who had stolen humanity's future. She spent her days plotting against him, dreaming of his downfall. Leto watched her with a strange kind of affection. Her rebellion was exactly what he had been waiting for. It was the sign that his long experiment was nearing its end. Siona did not know it, but she carried the secret he had been cultivating for 100 generations. She was invisible to his prescient sight. When he looked at her future, he saw nothing. A void. A blur. She was the culmination of the golden path. To test her, he would subject her to the same trials that he and his father had faced. He would take her deep into the Sareer, the last great desert. He would abandon her with little water and no tools. She had to survive. She had to find the instincts of her ancestors, the deep Fremen knowledge that lay sleeping in her blood. She had to learn the rhythms of the sand, the language of the wind. She would run, and he would follow, his great body moving silently through the dunes. She would curse him, hate him, but she would also learn. She would find water where there seemed to be none. She would learn to read the signs of the desert, to become a part of it. And in the crucible of the Sareer, her true nature would be forged. She would become the predator, the survivor that humanity needed. He also tested her with the spice. He would expose her to massive amounts of it, forcing her through the agony that unlocked prescient vision. But for her, the vision did not open. The spice storm would rage in her mind, a terrifying ordeal, but it would not grant her the ability to see the future. This, too, was a success. It proved that her immunity was complete. She was the one who could walk out of the cage. He would watch her as she walked along the forested banks of the new rivers, the wind tossing her hair, her face set with a look of fierce determination. She thought she was his enemy, his greatest failure. But in his ancient, patient eyes, she was his greatest success. She was the key, she was the future, and the wind whispered through the leaves of the new forests, carrying the scent of wildness and rebellion. Chapter 7. Courtly Tides. At the right hand of the God Emperor stood a man named Moneo. He was Leto's major domo, his chief steward, his only real confidant. Moneo was also an Atreides, a distant descendant of the same line as Siona, his daughter. For his entire life, Moneo had served Leto. He had seen dozens of Duncans come and go. He had witnessed the slow, patient unfolding of the golden path. His loyalty was absolute, but it was not blind. It was a loyalty born of a terrible understanding. As a young man, Moneo had also rebelled. He had seen Leto as a tyrant and had tried to defy him. In response, Leto had shown him a glimpse of his prescient vision. He had shown Moneo the countless futures where humanity destroyed itself, the futures filled with fire and blood and extinction. And then he had shown him the single, narrow golden path. The vision had broken Moneo. He had understood, in one terrifying moment, the necessity of Leto's long reign. From that day on, he served not out of fear, but out of a deep, sorrowful conviction. His life was one of quiet, endless duty. He was the one who translated Leto's ancient, complex thoughts into practical orders. He managed the affairs of the empire, met with ambassadors, and oversaw the fish speakers. His face was a mask of calm, courteous efficiency. He moved through the great halls of the citadel with a quiet, purposeful grace, his robes whispering against the cool stone floors. The court of the God Emperor was not a place of lavish parties or political intrigue in the old sense. It was a place of deep, abiding quiet. The ceremonies were ancient, slow, and filled with symbolic meaning. A meeting with the Ixian ambassador was a careful dance of words, where every phrase was weighed for its hidden intent. A report from a fish speaker commander was a moment of deep, shared understanding. Monio was the master of this quiet world. He would stand beside Leto's great form, his head bowed slightly, listening to the God Emperor's low, rumbling voice. Leto's thoughts often spanned centuries, and it was Monio's job to connect them to the present moment. The spice must flow, Leto might say, a phrase that echoed through millennia of history. And Monio would understand that this meant adjusting a quota, sending a message to a cartel, and ensuring the stability of the entire universe for another day. He loved his master, with a love that was a mixture of awe, terror, and profound pity. He saw the immense loneliness in Leto, the terrible burden he carried. He was the only human who could speak to Leto as something approaching an equal, a friend. Their conversations were the tides that steered the empire, quiet currents moving beneath the still surface of the long peace. Moneo was the anchor that held the God Emperor to the world of men, and the sandalwood candles burned low, their smoke curling into the silent air of the great throne room. Chapter 8: Conspiracies in Low Voices. Even in a world of absolute peace, rebellion breathes in the shadows. Leto knew this. He allowed it. The conspiracies were part of the golden path, the necessary pressure that would shape humanity. They were like the grit that creates a pearl. He could see most of them in his prescient vision, faint threads of smoke in the great tapestry of time. He would watch them form, watch them grow, and then, with a gentle touch, he would unravel them. There were whispers among the spice cartels, who chafed under his absolute control of the precious substance. There were quiet plots among ambitious families who dreamed of a return to the old days of power and glory. The Ixians were always probing, always offering a new piece of forbidden technology to a discontented governor or a rebellious faction. 0E. But the most dangerous whispers came from a place of deep history, a place of buried secrets. They spoke of Jacurutu. Long ago, before the greening of Arrakis, Jacurutu had been a sietch, a hidden Fremen community. But they were not like the others. They had been smugglers, water stealers, outcasts. When Leto's father had risen to power, Jacurutu had been destroyed, its people scattered, its name erased from the maps. It was a place of taboo, a ghost story told to frighten children. But ghosts can be real. Descendants of Jacurutu still lived, hiding in the new cities, their identities concealed. They carried a deep, ancestral hatred for the Atreides. They saw Leto not as a savior, but as the final victory of their ancient enemies. They called him the Worm, the Abomination. They met in secret, in hidden rooms shielded by Ixian no-chambers, their voices low and urgent. They did not have armies or great wealth. They had only their hatred and a deep, cunning knowledge of the old ways. They were a shadow that even Leto could not always see clearly. They were tied to Siona, to her rebellion, though she did not know it. They saw her as a potential weapon, a tool to be used against the God Emperor. They whispered in her ear, feeding her anger, encouraging her defiance. 0S. Leto was aware of this current of hatred. He felt it as a cold spot in the warmth of his empire. He knew that the final confrontation would not be with armies on a battlefield. It would be something smaller, more personal. A A quiet act of betrayal, a hidden knife in the dark. He did not fear it. In a way, he welcomed it. It was the signal that his long watch was nearing its end. The final pieces of the great, cosmic puzzle were falling into place. The whispers were growing louder, converging on a single point in time. Let us breathe with the desert now. Feel the calm, steady rhythm of the wind. The conspiracies are just ripples on a deep, deep ocean. They cannot touch the quiet center, and the silence of the Sareer held the secrets, waiting for the right moment to release them. Chapter 9. Love, Trust, and Limits. In his immense, near-immortal existence, Leto II was profoundly alone. His mind operated on a scale that no human could comprehend. His body was a fortress that separated him from all physical contact. He was a god, and gods are lonely creatures. But even a god can feel a connection, a flicker of something that resembles love. For Leto, this connection was with a woman named Noree. She was one of the Jacurutu rebels, sent to spy on him, to find a weakness. She came to him as a supplicant, her face a mask of innocence. But Leto, with his ancient eyes, saw through the deception. He saw the fire in her, the hidden purpose. And he was not angry. He was intrigued. He allowed her to stay. He spoke with her, not as a god to a mortal, but as one mind to another. He shared with her fragments of his memory, glimpses of the world as it had been. He spoke of the scent of the desert blooms after a rare rain, of the feeling of sand scoured by a clean wind. He did not try to convert her or intimidate her. He simply showed her a part of himself. And a strange thing happened. Noree, the spy, the rebel, began to see the being behind the monster. She saw the deep sadness in his eyes, the weariness of his long, long burden. She began to understand the scale of his sacrifice. Her hatred began to soften, replaced by a complex mix of pity, awe, and a tender, protective feeling she could not name. She came to him not to spy, but to listen. She would sit for hours by his great, coiled body, the silence between them comfortable and full of meaning. Leto, in turn, found in her a respite from his solitude. She was a window into the simple, precious world of human concerns. He cared for her in his own way. He protected her from the other rebels, who grew suspicious of her long stays at the Citadel. He trusted her as much as he could trust anyone, but there were limits. His body, his transformation, was an absolute barrier. He could never know the simple human touch, the warmth of an embrace. His love, if that is what it was, had to be a thing of the mind, of the spirit. It was a deep, quiet companionship, a shared moment of understanding in the vast, lonely expanse of his reign. This, too, was part of his sacrifice. To save humanity, he had to give up his own. His relationship with Noree was a fragile, beautiful thing, a tiny flower growing in the shadow of a great mountain. It was a reminder of what the golden path had cost him, and a testament to the enduring power of connection, even across the gulf that separates a god from a mortal. And in the quiet moments, the slow rhythm of his breathing was the only sound, a steady, ancient heartbeat in the heart of the world. Chapter 10. Sacrifice on the Golden Path. The end came not with a bang, but with the gentle sound of flowing water. The golden path had reached its final turn. All the pieces were in place. Siona, the invisible woman, the latest Duncan Idaho, his memories restored, his loyalty torn between the past and the present. Monio, the faithful servant, and the whispers of the Jacurutu conspiracy. Now a focused plan. The plan was simple and relied on Leto's own nature. He was a creature of the desert, and his one true vulnerability was water. Massive amounts of it could overwhelm his body's metabolism, a shock that could end his long life. The setting was a high bridge spanning the new Idaho River. It was the day of a great religious festival, a celebration of the God Emperor. Leto was making a ceremonial procession across the bridge, his great body moving slowly, the crowds watching in silent awe. Siona and Duncan were with him, part of his honor guard. This was the moment the conspirators had chosen. From a hidden position, a rebel fish speaker, loyal to the old Jacurutu cause, used a small, powerful weapon to shatter the supports of the bridge. The stone groaned, cracked, and gave way. The great structure fell, plunging toward the river below. There was no panic in Leto. He had seen this moment. He had allowed it to come. As he fell, he looked at Siona and Duncan, who were falling with him. He saw the terror in their eyes, but also the flicker of something new, a bond forged in a shared moment of crisis. This was as it should be. His immense body hit the water. The shock was instantaneous, overwhelming. The sand trout that formed his skin, the creatures that had given him near immortality, reacted to the water with a primal, biological imperative. They began to abandon him, to flee his body, each one carrying a fragment of his consciousness, a pearl of his life's wisdom. They were the future sandworms, the creatures that would bring the spice back to the universe. His body, now mortal, began to dissolve in the rushing water. The long reign was over. In his final moments, he was no longer a god. He was just Leto Atreides, his purpose fulfilled. He had held humanity in his hand for 3,500 years, and now he was letting them go. His death was his final gift. It was the breaking of the cage. The water carried away the remains of the God Emperor, and the sand trouts scattered, beginning their long, slow work of remaking the world once more. The sacrifice was complete. The golden path was now secure, and the river flowed on, washing away the past and opening the way to an unknown future. Chapter 11. The world exhales. In the aftermath, a great quiet fell over the empire. The god was dead. The long peace was broken. But it was not a quiet of fear. It was a quiet of release. The world took a deep, collective breath. Siona and Duncan survived the fall. They crawled from the riverbank, soaked and shaken, and looked at each other. In that moment, they understood. They were the inheritors of Leto's legacy. Siona, with her genetic invisibility, was the mother of a new kind of humanity, one that could never be tracked or controlled by a prescient ruler. Duncan, the eternal soldier, was her protector, the guardian of this new, unpredictable future. They were the beginning of the scattering. Leto's death had shattered the chains of his own making. Without his absolute control, the empire began to fracture. But it did not collapse into chaos and fire as he had once feared. Instead, it began to dissolve. People started to leave. For millennia, humanity had been confined to a small, known cluster of worlds. Now, the urge to explore, to expand, to flee the memory of the long peace was overwhelming. Ships began to push out into the unknown voids between the stars. Families, communities, entire cultures set out on journeys with no certain destination. They were looking for new worlds, for new lives, for a place where they could be truly free. This was the scattering. This was the true purpose of the Golden Path. Leto had not just saved humanity from a single trap. He had taught them, in their very bones, to never be trapped again. He had given them a hunger for the horizon. The fish speakers disbanded, their purpose gone. The great qanats still flowed, but the central control was gone. Arrakis, now called Rakis, began its slow return to a desert world, as the new sandworms, carrying Leto's consciousness within them, began their life cycle. The spice would return, but it would no longer be the currency of a single ruler. It would be a treasure to be sought, a reason to travel, to risk, to live. The future was now a wide, open sky, full of countless, unpredictable stars. No one could see the path anymore. And that was the greatest gift of all. Humanity was finally, truly on its own, free to make its own mistakes, to find its own glory, to write its own story across the vast, silent canvas of the universe. And the desert exhaled, its wisdom scattered like seeds upon the wind, ready to take root in a million unknown worlds. Good night outro. The long story is over. The God Emperor sleeps, his consciousness scattered in the deep sand, his purpose finally complete. He was a shepherd who became a mountain to protect his flock, and then crumbled into dust to set them free. His was a story of immense patience, of a love so vast it had to be cruel. He taught the universe a lesson, written in his own flesh, that survival is not about comfort, but about the freedom to change, to wander, to become something new and unexpected. Now, the universe is quiet. The great scattering has begun. Out in the deep, dark spaces between stars, humanity is finding its way, carrying the memory of the long peace like a secret seed. They are invisible to any watching eye, their futures their own to make. Think of that freedom as you drift off to sleep. The future is not a narrow path that can be seen and controlled. It is a wide, open horizon, shimmering with possibility. It is a sky full of stars you have not yet seen, waiting for you to look up. Let your breath be as slow and steady as the turning of the worlds. Let the quiet of the desert night fill your room. Rest now. Rest in the knowledge that even the longest watch must end, and that every dawn brings a new, unwritten story. Sleep well.